It is Green Hour here on Khalid Malik's Morning Jam on FM91 every Wednesday at 10 a.m. It is Green Hour. Pakistan was recently found to be one of the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change. Have a listen to this. It is expected that even with aggressive emission reductions, the number of climate migrants linked to slow onset impacts of sea level rise, water stress, crop yield reductions, ecosystem loss, and drought in Pakistan will displace upwards of 600,000 people by 2030. Without aggressive action, that number is expected to be closer to 1.2 million. Joining us this morning, we have, he's a documentary photographer whose journalistic writings are about indigenous land, water rights, and urban spaces. He has used different mediums as tools for storytelling in moving towards a better and safer earth. He also teaches photography. Joining us is Basil Andrews. Good morning, Basil.
Hi, Khalid. Good morning.
Good to have you. Good to have you on Green Hour. So listen, every year we hear this. अगर कराची की बात करें कि this year we've got temperatures we've never seen before. This happened last year, happened the year before, and then this year again, record temperatures. It's like we keep upping ourselves, with record-breaking temperatures. I mean, what's going on? Are we just getting closer to the sun, or what's the story here?
If we were going closer to the sun, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. But so what's basically happening is that as we move on further on to the future, and because we have greenhouse gases in our atmosphere that just keep increasing, that's just like trapping a lot more heat on our planet.
Yeah.
And that is causing the heat spates that we are seeing over time. As time passes, it's just going to get hotter and warmer over time. This summer we've seen temperatures come in much more closer than expected. Usually what we would have is like the middle of April, the end of April, where temperatures would rise to like sometimes when we start to feel a lot of hotness around. This time it's much more earlier, and it's getting hot.
So break it down for me like I'm in school. Is this climate change? Is this global warming? What's going on?
So as of now, there's still some assessment being going on about what's the reason behind the current spate of temperatures. But there are existing research that says that, at least in our part of the world, South Asia, we are expected to feel the heat a lot more faster for various reasons. But more, the likelier reason, the more probable reason is because of our very unique local weather patterns in this part of the world. I have a tennis ball and a marker.
I don't have a bat.
I don't need a bat for that.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
So basically, if I was to draw an imaginary line around the ball,
right,
that shows it's the equator.
Got it. So the imaginary line that you're drawing, Basil is drawing right now, is the equator. Got it. Around the ball. Ball represents Earth, I'm assuming, correct?
Yes. It's a Shield 31 ball for all our listeners out there. So we're here around somewhere around this region. This is just a reference point.
Just on top of the equator.
Yeah, a bit few degrees north of the equator.
North of the equator.
I believe it's 30 degrees north.
Okay.
What happens is when we are orbiting around the sun, the sun essentially moves over the northern hemisphere, and that causes the higher temperatures over time. Usually what we see is that the sun impacts the equator and much more hotter. There's more energy put out there because of the incoming solar radiation. And now that we are in the northern hemisphere, is essentially where the equator lies, and all that solar energy and that radiation hits the Asian continent, the North American side of the continents on that side, which is what is the most the reason behind why we have these kind of summers over here.
Yeah.
It wasn't like this before.
Right.
Pre-industrial, I'd say 150 years earlier.
Yeah.
It was not that hot. But now, as the science is telling us, more carbon emissions, more GHG emissions are causing a lot of our heat to be trapped inside our planet Earth.
Is there more? Because, I mean, it's interesting you said that, because if you look at it, we were still, what did you say, 30 degrees? 40 degrees north of the equator.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago, we were still about 30, 40 degrees north of the equator. So our geographical positioning hasn't changed, but the temperatures weren't as high perhaps 100 years ago as compared to today's temperature.
Yes.
And we talk about climate change, we talk about global warming, but you also talk about the Industrial Revolution that sort of contributing to what what else? What does that mean though? So we're still in the same place, but high temperatures.
What it basically means is that if have you ever seen a greenhouse?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So think of the ceiling, the glass that is used to create that kind of environment for your for those plants inside the greenhouse.
Right.
If we take that glass right up high into the sky, and we say that every day there's about 1 megaton of carbon dioxide pumped up into the atmosphere. So essentially that huge glass pane acts as a
buffer, shield?
Not a shield per se, but more like a way of trapping a lot of the solar radiation that can get out of the Earth and into space essentially. But as we pump in more global greenhouse gases, our windows of opportunity essentially just diminish over time. That just traps in a lot more solar radiation. When we talk about solar radiation, we're talking about infrared energy in that way, and that stays inside the Earth and its atmosphere, which causes a lot of the heating that we're seeing now.
Yeah. Basil, there's something interesting. There's an article I believe you wrote. It says, and I quote, Karachi's on the list of cities along with Mexico City, New Delhi, Dhaka, Kolkata, Cairo, Lagos, Jakarta, Guangzhou, facing the compound effects of urban heat islands and rising air temperatures from global heating. Just before, you mentioned how we are seeing rise in temperatures, and there are a number of factors that this is attributed to. But what I find interesting as a student of Green Hour is, and you're the expert, but that urbanization is also one of these contributing factors. Is that an oversimplification?
So there are many factors in play here. When we talk about cities, modern cities, we've conventionally used a lot of materials that absorb a lot of heat. Concrete, asphalt, these are materials that soak in a lot of the heat during the day and put it out during the night. When we talk about heat islands, there's a temperature differential when we compare temperatures in the city centers and temperatures out there in non-urban areas or your rural parts of the for any city for that matter. So when this differential exists is then when we call that we have an urban heat island problem in the city. For instance, if you're in the city today or tomorrow and you stay inside, might be much more warmer compared to when you go out to say some place in Malik or near the beach. Basically areas that do not have a lot of built up environment when we talk about it. So in that sense, cities for that matter they're kind of like in a double position where you're not just experiencing the heating because of global heating in that sense, but it's also because we have cities that just generally warm because of the way it's built and the way it's structured.
Just before we spoke about urbanization of cities being a contributing factor. Did you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so we do have warming in our cities. We have various sources of heat. It's also a contributing factor to a lot of the heat generated within our cities like Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad.
Yeah.
Apart from already that the global heating aspect and the concrete and the asphalt, we also have like traffic. We have ACs as well, contributing a lot towards the general ambient heat that's in the environment, that essentially. But I also want to move away from cities essentially. We also have a problem of heat out there in our open non-urban spaces, where towns and villages, they are much smaller, and this year we are facing like a shortage of wheat in terms of produce. Farmers this year are like counting their losses because their wheat produce has either shriveled up or things वैसे ही produce नीचे आई है. So when we're talking about people like them who are facing problems like this, if they're going to be facing a lot more hotter days over time, how is a farmer going to go out to work and plant the crop, collect the crop, etc., and send it to the cities? We also do know that climate migrations are also a thing in this part of the world, where we have slow movement of people from the villages coming over to the cities because they want to work. So these are all these different dynamics affecting how we're not just dealing with heat and climate change, but also where people are moving to over time. And are we really planning for the future in those terms? These are like questions that we can expand on.
So how does one plan for and what is the future? When we say plan for the future, what is the future that we're looking into or looking at? And how will that future change if we plan? Do you know what I mean? So we are planning for the future. What does that plan look like?
So we know for sure that it's going to get hot.
Right.
We don't have a choice or say in a matter of things that way. Even if we aggressively, as you said, reduce our carbon emissions, it's still going to be relatively hotter on average. Summers will come in more earlier. Cycles, planting seasons, those may have to shift around.
Okay.
If it gets too hot in our cities, are we going to shift our work schedule around the heat? Outdoor workers, for that matter, these are vulnerable groups that who are exposed to a lot of heat when they're working outside. If it gets too hot, are they going to work at night? Already we do see that a lot, or some part of the work does shift to cooler hours of the day, which is post evening, after sunset, towards 10 p.m. midnight. So it's things like this that we're slowly seeing a transition of people's behavior actually like changing to deal and cope with the heat over time.
How does one adapt to this change? I mean, how do we cool ourselves down? Ice bath, says Basil. How can we? I mean, what can we do? How do we adapt to this? Because as I said, it's going to get hotter, right? There's no getting around this, is what I'm hearing. So how do we then adapt?
So
and do we have a choice?
In terms of adaptation, I think more or less what we need to start thinking about is our individual thermal comfort that we call, in terms of where we are. Being more clever about the heat that might start earlier in the day. We also do need to plan for our cities. Are they shaded enough? Are right now pedestrian walkways? People use public transport. Are they able to walk to their bus stops with shade, or protected from the searing sunlight?
I use public transportation. There is no shading.
Exactly.
There's no shade.
Exactly. You step out of the city today, and there's a very high chance that you will not find proper shade for you to go through to your destination. Planting trees helps. We need more trees. Generally speaking, we need more trees to act as shading points. There- we also need to talk about how we can reduce solar radiation that's being absorbed by our cities, and uh, how we can like make them more cooler, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about Karachi or even Lahore or in Islamabad,
Yeah.
we have a certain model that we want to have
Yeah.
when we want cities to be designed in Pakistan.
Yes.
They're supposed to look like Dubai,
Mm.
but essentially we've copied the Dubai model without investing in sufficient infrastructure to deal with heat. The countries in the Gulf are ready to deal with that. Essentially, most of their spaces are either air conditioned or they have some kind of mechanism to deal with the heat in that sense. But places like Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, or even like smaller towns like Multan, Faisalabad,
Ji.
those are really open spaces. And for a country like Pakistan or even like India, thinking about how we are going to reduce our heat absorbed within our cities in that sense.
But I'm curious, what got you interested in climate change, and what was the tipping point for you?
I got interested about heat the first time in 2015. That was the first time I actually felt the onset of what an actual heat wave looks like or feels like. If everyone remembers, it was really hot at that time, really muggy. Unfortunately, we also had many deaths. So in terms of adaptation as well, we're also thinking about heat stress. Are we ready to deal with the heat stress that we generally feel even when there's no heat wave? Right now, we say that at 40 degrees Celsius, we do have a heat wave alert generated for most of the city. But वैसे ही आपके जो शहर हैं, they're already warmer on average anyways. So if in the future, at some point in the future, we're going to have like these short-term measures where we can like either shift work schedules around. We
Times
might
of the day, yeah.
Times of the day of the work when we want to work. Pressures on utilities, how are we going to address that? Pressures on food security, how are we going to plan for that? Can we use technologies to deal with the kind of food shortages that might occur in the future because of the loss of agricultural land? In terms of housing, for that matter, if I talk about Karachi or even Lahore, we have spaces that aren't built for proper ventilation, and that also drives a lot of the heat felt within homes. People today, because Karachi's housing is sort of like informal and informal housing they are much more vulnerable when we talk about heat stress in those areas. People plan for water usage much ahead in time. Those who have spaces or relatives who have air conditioning in their homes, families literally go to those homes because they want to spend the day during the hot hours of the daytime in those spaces. I know of students who have been saying that they cannot study because it gets too hot at home. Therefore, they go to their tuition centers, or if they want to take a break, they go to the shopping malls to cool down, to chill out.
What would you say in closing, because we're going to be getting heat wave warnings for months to come? What can we do to adjust, adapt in the meantime? What would you say? How can we help?
The best thing that we could possibly do right now is actively and aggressively decarbonize our lifestyles and our economies. I'm saying like across the board. It's not just debates about global north-south divides in that sense,
Right.
but aggressively take our economies and like move it away from generating a lot more global greenhouse gases. That's it. Because even if you have an emissions business as usual, as they call it,
Yeah.
even if that happens, we will not have a choice or a say in how extensive or how elongated our heat or hotter days might span over time. Right now, what we have 2 to 3 day hot days
Yeah.
or heat
wave
days.
Yeah.
Next year it could go on to like 4 days.
Yeah.
Further down in the future it could be a week. So
Right.
these the science does say that reducing greenhouse gases will help. There's a lot of scientific literature that actually points to a direction where we can get out of this problem. It's just that everyone needs to be on board. All stakeholders need to be on board to actively and seriously think about the kind of future they want to leave, not just for themselves but for the future generations that are going to like deal with this or have to deal with it.
I like to get on board. Basil Andrews this morning. Basil, where can we get you if people want to get in touch with you or post questions to you? Where can they find you?
I am active on Twitter. Just search my name, Basil Andrews, and I should be there. I'm usually talking about climate change and heat on that space.
Yeah. Basil Andrews joining us this morning for Green Hour. Burning Earth. Thank you, Basil.
Thank you.
And that takeaway message, get on board because these days may prolong. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. And thank you for joining us on Green Hour every Wednesday. We're out of time. We'll be here every Wednesday on Green Hour. That is at 10 a.m. Thanks very much. We'll catch you next week, next Wednesday, 10 a.m. on Green Hour. This is Khalid Malik's Morning Jam. We'll catch you tomorrow. It's Thursday, which means that it's Throwback Jams, Throwback Thursdays, leaving you with some heat waves. May your news be good news.
FM91 presents Green Hour on Khalid Malik's Morning Jam. Watch the episodes on digital platforms of FM91, News 1 and TV 1.